The late 19th century was dubbed the Gilded Age, thanks to a work by the American writer Mark Twain. One of the great authors who lived through this time and would later bring it to life in one of her novels was Edith Wharton. She came from the very prominent and wealthy Jones family of New York, who were thought by many to be the origin of the phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. Wharton was known for hosting the American literary elite at the turn of the century, including novelist Henry James, and became an extremely popular novelist herself, thanks to the success of The House of Mirth and Ethan Frome. Then, in 1920, Wharton released The Age of Innocence, which drew readers back to a time that Wharton knew particularly well, high society in the Gilded Age. We can't behave like people in novels, though, can we? Wharton would be the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction with The Age of Innocence. Just 4 years after its publication, it was adapted into a silent film at Warner Brothers, and again in the sound era at RKO Studios. The most well-known version is Martin Scorsese's 1993 film starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Good evening, Mrs. Welland. Good evening, Nate.
Newland, you know my niece, Countess Olenska.
Countess.
The Age of Innocence was a tremendous recapturing of the spirit of the Gilded Age. But at the time it was published, a new era of excess was already beginning in the aftermath of World War I.
It was the Great White Way in 1920 at the beginning of the Jazz Age. Though movies hit from the side streets to Broadway itself, the most lavish signs still advertise the stage.
The Roaring Twenties was swinging into high gear, and one of the great overnight success stories was the comic romantic work Gentlemen Prefer Blondes by Anita Loos. A kiss on the hand may feel very, very good, but a diamond and sapphire bracelet lasts forever. Like Edith Wharton, Anita Loos was another trailblazer, becoming the first female staff scriptwriter in Hollywood when she began work with D.W. Griffiths. But her greatest success came when her original series of sketches in Harper's Bazaar were published as a novel. The tales of Lorelei and her friend Dorothy, who set sail across the Atlantic, proved an instant sensation, both with the public and with other prominent authors of the time. Loos received letters of commendation from the likes of William Faulkner, Aldous Huxley, and James Joyce. Edith Wharton herself declared it the great American novel. A film version soon followed, but this has sadly been lost. However, Loos herself would adapt Gentlemen Prefer Blondes into a Broadway musical, which would then be brought to the silver screen by Howard Hawks, where the greatest blonde of all time, Marilyn Monroe, formed one of her iconic roles.
First blonde and first brunette, Marilyn and Jane won their chance to join filmdom's immortals by their work in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the Technicolor adaptation of the sensationally humorous musical comedy stage hit.
A kiss of the hand may be quite continental, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. A kiss may be grand, but it won't pay the rental on your humble flat, or help you at the automat. Men grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our charms in the end. But square cut or pear shape, these rocks don't lose their shape. Diamonds are a girl's best friend.
In the same year as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, another great novel was published, but to far less commercial success, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald's own life story had played out as a romantic fable. The young writer was entranced by the Southern belle Zelda Sayre and was only able to convince her to marry him thanks to the success of his first published novel, This Side of Paradise. The married couple moved to the French Riviera, where Fitzgerald worked on his magnum opus, The Great Gatsby. However, when the novel was published, his magic touch had seemingly left him, and the book was deemed a failure by most critics, although Edith Wharton once again saw its brilliance. Its central tale is the love triangle between Daisy Buchanan, her husband Tom, and the mysterious Jay Gatsby as their remarkable lives play out on the north shore of Long Island. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. The real-life Fitzgerald love story would not have a happy ending, and the author's later career paled in comparison to his early triumphs. He had coined another term for the Roaring Twenties as the Jazz Age, but his time in the limelight proved all too brief, and he died at the age of just 44. The Great Gatsby has only elevated in status since then, and 3 separate film adaptations have been made over the decades. A 1949 version, a 1973 version with a script by Francis Ford Coppola, and a 2013 version by Baz Luhrmann.
Excuse me, I need to look familiar. Having a good time, old sport?
Oh, the whole thing's incredible. I live just next door. He sent me an actual invitation. Seems I'm the only one. I still haven't met Mr. Gatsby.
No one's met him.
They say he's third cousin to the Kaiser and second cousin to the devil.
I'm afraid I haven't been a very good host, old sport. You see, I'm Gats.
His smile was one of those rare smiles that you might come across 4 or 5 times in life. It seemed to understand you and believe in you just as you would like to be understood and believed in.
Fitzgerald himself worked in Hollywood later in his career in order to make ends meet. While his own stories would only become the most anticipated of film adaptations after he died, he did work for a while on what was the beginning of a new era of adapting romantic bestsellers to film blockbusters when he worked for David O. Selznick on an adaptation of Gone with the Wind.
My dear Mrs. Kennedy, my very dear Mrs. Kennedy.
Don't see how you have the gall to face me.
When I think you could have had my millions if you'd just waited a little while. Oh, how fickle is woman.
What is it you want? I have important things to do.
Would you mind satisfying my curiosity on a point which has bothered me for some time?
Well, what is it? Be quick.
Tell me, Scarlett, do you never shrink from marrying men you don't love?
How did you ever get out of jail? Why didn't they hang you?
Oh, that, not much trouble. There's nothing much the money won't buy. I observe has even bought you the Honorable Mr. Wills.
Oh, you still hate Ashley Wills. Do you know I believe you're jealous of him?
You still think you're the belle of the county, don't you? That you're the cutest little trick in shoe leather, and that every man you meet is dying of love for you.
Let me by.
Don't be angry, Scarlett. Tell me, where are you going?
Going out to the mill if it's any of your business.
Through Shady Town alone? Haven't you been told that it's dangerous to drive alone through all that riffraff?
Don't worry about me. I can shoot straight. I don't have to shoot too far.
What a woman.
Gone with the Wind would be Margaret Mitchell's only novel. The tale of the antebellum South became one of the best-selling novels of all time and was adapted for the screen just 2 years after its publication in one of the most anticipated cinematic events in history. It also ushered in a process that continues to this day, where the most popular romantic novels usually don't have to wait long before a director gets hold of them. Selznick continued the process himself with an adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca.
No, stop!
What the devil are you shouting about? Who are you? What are you staring at?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare, but I only thought...
Oh, you did it. Well, what are you doing here?
I was only walking.
Well, get on with your walking. Don't hang about here screaming.
Rebecca enraptured readers with its tale of the mysterious events at Mandalay, an estate in Cornwall where du Maurier spent much of her life. The narrator, whose first name is never stated, marries the wealthy Mr. de Winter after a whirlwind romance in Monte Carlo. Will you look into my eyes and tell me that you love me now? The second Mrs. de Winter, though, finds herself constantly in the shadow of the first, the troubled Rebecca. The story was perfect for Alfred Hitchcock, who had brought du Maurier's previous novel to make it into the screen, and his film adaptation would win the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1940.
They regard themselves and their jobs as something special, something elite. They are fighting men to whom war is strictly business, about which they have no illusion. These are the very men who in the far Pacific were first to land and give the enemy a bitter foretaste of how United States Marines pioneer a big job of war.
When World War II broke out, readers around the world wanted a bit of escapism in their fiction, and this is partly the reason why The Great Gatsby had such a resurgence. The book was issued to American soldiers and quickly became a firm favourite. Once the war had ended, another author took up the baton of tragic romance when James Jones, a soldier who'd fought in the Pacific, published From Here to Eternity. But that's not love, he thought. That's not what she wants. Not what any of them want. They do not want you to find yourself in them. They want, instead, that you should lose yourself in them. And yet, he thought, they are always trying to find themselves in you. Jones had been discovered by the famous editor Maxwell Perkins, who had also discovered F. Scott Fitzgerald in the 1920s. He pushed him to transfer his own experience of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor into his debut novel. The story of complicated romantic lives intertwined with the beginnings of a world war proved an instant hit, and once again it was quickly turned into a film directed by Fred Zinnemann. It features one of the most romantic scenes in movie history.